we're always learning something new, and we have a fairly good understanding. And you're right, verbal judo. I took verbal judo as an instructor when it was like 2006, I think. I remember that course. I remember very, very well. I also remember being like, this is great, but it doesn't solve all of my problems.
Right.
San Diego 911 emergency. You need to come right away. There's a man with a gun and it's loaded. Receiving emergency signal from 4 George 1141. We got a white female down. We need paramedics code please. All available units will code that
way. Welcome to the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. Well, I was at the ILEETA conference, the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association. I was fortunate to, again, spend time with amazing people. Over 750 law enforcement educators and trainers from all over the world. One of them who was gracious enough to sit down and have a chat with me was Adam Kinakin. Adam is the founder of ILET, I-L-E-T, which is the International Law Enforcement Training Network. It's a community-based training platform that's designed to create and facilitate training globally. I'm a strong supporter of ILET, in fact, so much that I invested in ILET as a founding member, and I've also been selected to be a trainer at their next training conference. Now, Adam, you can follow him at ILET.network. And Adam is not shy about speaking up about things that need to happen to make our community safer and making sure that law enforcement training is the best it possibly can be. I have no doubt that you're going to enjoy this chance to hear Adam's wisdom.
All right, yeah, however you want to start it or do it.
Yeah.
I'm happy. I'll rock
Talk
and roll.
about, like, I don't know, half an hour or so.
Sure, dude. Whatever you want.
Welcome to the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. I am here with Adam, who I've just introduced you to, and the more I get to know you, it's a cliche, but the more I get to know you, the more I love and respect you. You crack me up on a regular basis. There has not been, I can't think of a conversation I've had with you where I wasn't ending up laughing at some point during that conversation, usually multiple times. And it started right before I hit the record button. So for the listeners, you're in for a treat talking to Adam. So we're just going to jump into the middle of where we were. And you were saying, and why I wanted to start the recording in the middle of this was because we were talking about de-escalation, and you made a joke about, well, you were serious. It wasn't even a joke. You just laughed, so it sounded like a joke, about I de-escalate with force. And I said, well, sometimes that is de-escalation. Sometimes de-escalation is pointing a gun at somebody. Sometimes it is letting them know that you're going to kill them or use force necessary to stop the threat. That's not what we tell them. But sometimes it's a teacher telling a kid, or principal telling a kid, you're going to be expelled from school or suspended from school. But
yeah, so here's what it breaks down to, brother. And I mean, I made the coyingly joking, like I use force to de-escalate things, which isn't incorrect. I mean, I ran a door to bar for many years, and we've done lots of different things. But besides the point, I think de-escalation has become synonymous with like communication. And there's an issue there because when we tell officers, hey, we're going to do, you have to do de-escalation. Everybody hates the word de-escalation. We have to do de-escalation training. Oh, great. Right. Like, but what we fail to do and what we need to start doing is starting to articulate, what does that actually mean? What does de-escalation mean? What are we doing with it? Right? Because I could make an argument that de-escalation could involve no action at all other than officers showing up. Right? I could also argue that de-escalation could be me putting a round through someone's face because they're charging at somebody else with a knife. But we've now said de-escalation is us showing up and being able to talk somebody down and calming down the situation so that no violence has to occur. Well, that's just not, I mean, in an ideal world, sure, absolutely love that. But let's be frank about what the reality of the job that we're tasking officers and first responders and public safety professionals to do, which is you want to get home safe and you want to make sure that as many people in the situation involved get home safe, right? It doesn't mean everybody gets home safe. It doesn't mean nobody gets hurt. It just means that we've minimized and mitigated as much of that as possible. That's how I see de-escalation. And so a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people don't like it when I say like, hey man, I've de-escalated lots of situations by choking people unconscious. Because let's take an example that civilians would understand, a bar fight, right? I'll see two people squaring off against one another and I know they're going to fight, right? And what is the likely outcome of that? Someone's probably going to get struck once or multiple times, have some type of potential TBI, or there's going to be some type of secondary or tertiary mechanism of injury where they fall and hit their head and crack their skull open, or 1,000 different things, or they get jumped and they get stomped. Okay, well, I can go up there and I can grab the most aggressive person. I can choke them unconscious in 3 to 7 seconds, move them out to the outside, wait for the police to show up, or just wait for them to leave. And no violence has really occurred other than that person being uncomfortable for a little bit. I consider that a de-escalation in that situation. Even though I went in and applied force, having being a secondary party to that incident. But we don't teach that. That's not what de-escalation is. So again, it's coming up with phrasing when we talk about de-escalation, especially in this law enforcement context. Are we doing a good enough job explaining this is the context in which we are discussing de-escalation, and this is the mechanism that we're trying to achieve in this specific subject? Using it as a catch-all term is really where I get really frustrated when I see people training de-escalation training. I mean, every company in the world that wants to do any type of training bought into the de-escalation buzzword and now offers a course in de-escalation. Mm-hmm. They don't have the experience that you do. They don't have the context and the understanding that you do behind it, yet they're saying, well, hey, we can teach that too, because all it is X, Y, or Z.
Well, TDS. I was in the military. I was on submarines for 9 years. It was a nuclear powered submarine. So everything was about radiation spills, radiation leaks, everything. Time, distance, shielding, TDS. That's the vast majority of any de-escalation training that's given is, well, slow things down, make sure you have adequate distance and adequate cover and or concealment, ideally cover. All of which is true. But it doesn't tell you, how do you slow things down? How far away should you be? What kind of cover and concealment can I have? We can probably figure that one out. But the big questions of, all right, so I slowed things down. I've got distance, I've got shielding, just like on a radiation exposure. What do I do now? They never tell you that. Verbal judo, Doc Thompson was a genius. He was a man before his time, truly. But the problem was Doc Thompson didn't have the benefit of a functional MRI machine to shove people in and know what's happening to the brain. So his languaging that was created irritates the brain. It doesn't help the brain, and it takes you up to a certain point and then leaves you hanging. So verbal judo is not bad. It's just not enough. And what you just described is a lot of de-escalation training is not necessarily bad, but it's not enough.
Well, there's no golden bullet. There's no one size fits all training. That's like, you know what I mean? It comes down to everybody wants that solution, right? Yeah. How can we give our officers this so it makes it so that they do it right every time?
And they never hurt anybody. That's what the public wants. I mean, in large part, and a lot of attorneys for cities and counties, different agencies want, well, just don't use force because we get sued otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. And I love those questions. I mean, you know, I mean, do a lot of work with Force Science and a lot of some of these organizations that bring in the science, the research, the data, and understanding human factors. And this is how human beings actually react in these circumstances and situations, right? I mean, outside of just the anecdotal experiences and understanding, here's the actual science, and this is how it actually works and I can prove it to you. So here's the peer-reviewed data, not from law enforcement. Here's the peer-reviewed data from professional sports. Here's the peer-reviewed data from academia. Here's the peer-reviewed data from whatever. Pick a topic. And I think it's really interesting when you talk about stuff like that, because the de-escalation component of it and understanding human behavior is one of those things where we're always learning something new.
Mm-hmm. True.
We're always learning something new, and we have a fairly good understanding. And you're right, verbal judo. I took verbal judo as an instructor when it was like 2006, I think, through Darcy Pennock, who was the Canadian director up in Canada at the time. And I remember that course. I remember very, very well. I also remember being like, this is great, but it doesn't solve all of my problems. Right? This is great. And the cyclical arguments and understanding how to actually work and using language to actually have people think that I still use a lot of the techniques that I learned in verbal judo. Right? I'm going to get this person to do what I want them to do, but I'm going to make it think that it's their idea. I love that.
Yeah. Like
right. I love that so much. But the thing is, and what we don't take into account is the fact that human beings are still human beings. And there is not one of us that is going to be the same. You could run 1,000 scenarios and set it up the exact same way every time, and there's still going to be variance in every single one of those outcomes. To think that we're going to have the same result, that's what the administration wants. That's what the public wants. We always want this result. And it's not their fault for wanting that. We haven't done a good enough job as an industry educating them on the reality of the job that we're tasked to do and the outcomes that are realistic in the context of that job. I've done a lot of interviews here already today and this week, talking with some of the best instructors in the world. And the conversation always seems to come back around to, we have to do a better job sharing information, right? We do a great job here at ILEETA. We talk a lot to one another. We get to share, even with ILET, you being a part of ILET, and we have great conversations and with all of these phenomenal people. And then I was going, okay, well, great, but how do we get this to the general public, right? Because we can do a great job at teaching officers how to engage with the civilian population when they're responding to calls, or even like PIOs and going out and doing, public events, and how do we engage with and interact with the civilian population. But every single thing that we do leaves some type of impression. So if we have an officer who's showing up to like an event in uniform, even their presence and how they appear in uniform, let's talk military, right? Dress and deportment is a real thing. And there's
100%.
There's a reason behind it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if I show up and I look like a freaking goat rope and my boots are muddy and my pants are unbloused and my shit my shirts are wrinkled and I have one sleeve rolled up here and I have another one an extra 3 inches up, I got a 5 o'clock shadow. When people see that, they go, I don't know about you.
Well, quite frankly, it's one of my favorite phrases came from Tony Robbins in the personal development world. How you do one thing is how you do everything. And the reality is, if somebody's showing up, and by the way, to our listeners, just another example why I love Adam like a brother. He just comes up with these phrases and examples that just, I told you, we've got 12 minutes and I'm busting up already. So if you can't make good choices about your appearance, we gave you a gun and told you not to kill somebody unless it was absolutely necessary. How's your decision making going to be in that area? Because if how you do one thing is how you do everything, you didn't make good choices in how you dressed yourself, which is a relatively low level capability skill.
Yeah, and like correlation doesn't equal causation, but there's a lot of components where I can take that exact same example and say, well, if you don't give a shit about how you look and you're not paying attention to that, there's probably a pretty good chance that you also didn't put too much effort into the training that you did, and you don't put too much. in your
maintenance
equipment,
of your equipment.
or your own personal development outside of work, or all XYZ list is a million miles long. But there is a very real connection, to your point, between how I present myself, and especially if we're in the public eye, how I present myself. And then let's tie this all back around to the de-escalation thing, right? If I show up to a call as an officer and I have somebody, say it's a young, what would be a good example here? I have a teenage male who is has some type of, maybe there's a mitigating factors, mental illness, something. It could maybe a chemical imbalance, chemical dependency, doesn't matter. We show up because they're fighting, their parents can't get control of them and they're freaking out, right? Officer shows up, I could anecdotally say that if I have two officers show up in two parallel scenarios, right? We split the universe in half. It's the exact same situation, and I have Officer A showing up here and I have Officer B showing up here. Officer A is cleaned up, everything is tight, everything is where it should be on their gear, their kit, their appearance, how they present themselves, how they address themselves, how they address the person. And they come in there and they're clear, they're concise, they're professional, but they're not abrasive. You have that person, and then you have Officer B who shows up and they have their shirt untucked and they're a little disheveled looking. They're walking up, they're like texting on their phone as they're getting up there, putting it into their pocket. And, they're looking in the window, seeing, and they're like, do I really want to go in there? And they walk in, they're like, hey, what's going on? What's happening? Right? Just in that example alone, I bet you people listening or watching this would be like, which officer would you rather have show up? Which one do you think at face value is going to have the higher chance of success with a teenage male in that scenario? And notice, I didn't mention anything about height, race, sex, because those things obviously are very high mitigating or contributing factors to, I could have said, hey, I have this officer who's 6'5", 300 pounds, like professional bodybuilder looking dude, right? Well, obviously that's going to be different, right? Or 100-pound female soaking wet, right? So I wanted to take those out of that example, but just in their dress and deportment alone, which one do you think has a higher chance of success? And I bet you that you run those to completion and you run that 1,000 times each, I bet you we're going to have a pretty high variance in the outcomes of those scenarios, right? From one consideration alone. And so when we talk de-escalation, it's not just the words that I'm saying. It's not just the actions that I'm taking. There is a totality of the circumstance, and we teach this, right? We talk use of force, we talk all this kind of stuff. You have to be able to articulate and talk about the totality of the circumstance that we're in. What happened in the situation? Well, yeah, I took the guy down and he slipped and hit his head. Yeah, but did we discuss what was the ground like? Was it raining? Was it not raining, right? Was the ground slippery? Was it cold? Was it hot? What kind of boots were you wearing? What kind of shoes were they wearing? Right? Like, was it night? Was it daytime? Was it nighttime? Was there ambient lighting? There's 1,000 considerations, and we teach officers to be able to articulate those considerations when we use force. We should be doing that same thing when we teach de-escalation. Is like, listen, man, I'm not going to tell you how to pound sand. But what I'm going to tell you is, if we want to stack the deck in our favor. So before you show up to this call, if you do X, Y, and Z every time, you're going to have a higher likelihood of success, right?
Yeah.
And then you go in there, and the tone of voice that you use, you're cognizant of that. The words that are coming out of your mouth, because language is so critically important. And we say, listen, these are some words that you're probably going to want to avoid, and these are some words that we know actually work fairly well at delivering information clearly and concisely. Now we say, let's stack that into the pile, right? And then we start going through and we make sure that they're up to speed and up to date on decision-making, critical thinking tasks, right? Not how do you run your gun, how do you use an armbar, takedown, how do you put on handcuffs, how do you use OC, all of this kind of stuff, Can you read a room? Are you situationally aware? Are you able to move and create time and distance because you've identified something that isn't quite right, and you go, I'm going to take a step back or 2 steps back, or move from the middle of the living room back to the doorway in case I got to get the hell out of here because something's going to go sideways, right? Officers have a really hard time disengaging, right? We have a very hard time. It's like I've taken ground,
Yeah.
right? And I'm not going to give up any of this ground.
Yeah. I got this far, and if I give it up, I feel like all of my forward progress, all this real estate that I gained, I've just given it up for nothing, and I've actually lost something. Another phrase is sunk cost. It's cost me so much money. I've sunk this much money, this much effort, this much time into this. I don't want to give that up. It feels like a loss, when in reality, it's not. You bring up so many good points. Let me ask you this. When there's a phrase, and it's right on the tip of my tongue, so help me out. And listeners, if you know what it is, put it in the comments on whatever platform you're listening under. But it's the concept is take care of the little things. And I think it's take care of the little things before they become big things or something. You know what I'm talking about? But you're talking about like having your act together with not just your appearance, but also, your awareness of the situation, being able to read a room. Those are all little things that if you don't do those things, then it becomes something bad later on.
And here's the thing. It's any given Sunday, right? So on any specific call, on any specific day, say I have 100 things that I know are going to optimize my ability to make this go the way I want it to go, and I forget 1 or 2 or 10. Does it mean that I'm going to be unsuccessful? Not necessarily, right? We can still be successful and maintain a positive outcome, regardless of if we've checked every single box and stacked that deck completely in our favor. It's just we should strive to, on the majority, get as many of those points together as we can, right? And it's a big issue with instructors too that say, like, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. I like saying, this would be more ideal, less ideal, right? Like, more ideal is we do all of this stuff. But we should never have officers, and even, it's one thing if we're talking life or death and we're talking, like winning a gunfight, but the same approach should be taken in things like this, where it's, what we want to do is achieve a favorable outcome, right? In a gunfight, obviously we want to be not dead, ideally.
That's
right.
Yeah.
So that would be, I think, my number one thing is like, I just want to make it out of here breathing. Ideally, the community would say, obviously, the other person makes it out alive, which is kind of counterintuitive, because how do you win a gunfight is the other person is no longer able to return fire. But anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But what I'm trying to say is there's an issue with instructors where when we try to run scenarios, specifically when it comes to things like de-escalation, that it's a pass-fail. It's you either do this or you don't, and if you don't do it, you fail, and you get the X, and you have to run it again or whatever. The world is so much more fluid than that. And there's a really phenomenal reality-based training expert, Kelly Keith, up in Winnipeg. He's a master instructor for SETCAN, and a friend of mine, and he is absolutely phenomenal at teaching instructors how to run reality-based training and high fidelity training. And it really comes down to making sure officers have the leeway to make decisions within that scenario, and not stopping it because they didn't follow what the instructor believed was the right course of action, right? Every human being is different, right? Yeah. I don't know as the instructor what's going on in that officer's head, right? So, an example would be, we're running a scenario, and the concept behind it is we want to do OC training, right? So we set up a scenario, and maybe the officer, maybe we do like a black bag or goggles or whatever it is. Anyway, the officer's blind to the scenario, and you turn on the lights, you take off the goggles, take off the mask, whatever it is, and they're in there, and there's somebody with a edged weapon, and you're 10 feet away, right? Or whatever it is, but they're not advancing at you or these kind of things. And they're like, okay, well, here's the scenario. What are you gonna do? Right? And you're like, okay, well, this doesn't work. And maybe this is a bad example because there's an edge. Well, let's say it's I want to say edge weapon would be a bad one because obviously we know that's not the response that's going to be there. But let's say there's okay, no, let's use this example. I'll go through this as we play this. Maybe it's not an OC thing, but we have the officer expect the officer to pull their firearm and draw down on this person because it's a lethal threat, right?
Okay.
Maybe in my mind, I see the knife. He's got like a little, kitchen knife. And maybe for me, I draw my baton. And I engage that suspect with a baton. And the instructor goes, whoa, stop, 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 stop. What are you doing? It's a lethal threat. And I go, to who? To who? To me? To you? To them? Because in this hypothetical, I'm a Cali martial arts expert that has trained Filipino martial arts for 15 years. And I know sticks and knives better than my kids. Right? So he's got a knife this long. I have a baton that's this long. And I know how to use it.
Because of specialized training
Because
you've had, or knowledge, skills, abilities.
And so I feel comfortable in that scenario with a baton versus a knife, because maybe I don't want. Another misconception is people think police officers just want to go out and kill people. No. You go out onto this floor and this conference, and I guarantee you put a mic to any single one of those officers. They go, hey, do you want to ever kill somebody? Never. Not one person, ever. Right? So do I want to put myself in a scenario where that occurs? Now, in this example, it's a very radical example, but if you shift that to a de-escalation type of thing where I'm walking in there and I have options to be verbally aggressive with somebody who's non-compliant, or I maybe do X, Y, or Z, we may say, like, your job is to talk this person into doing a certain behavior. Okay. Well, who's to say that if I stuck around and just like sat there with this person for the next 25 minutes, that they wouldn't just calm down on their own?
Yeah, but we got calls for service holding, so we need to get to those.
And that's this is really interesting. And I'm glad we this is how this conversation went. I had an interview with Jim Glennon earlier today.
Love Jim Glennon.
And Jim was sharing a story of he responded to a call, and there was 4 officers that had got there before him, and he was a sergeant at the time, brand new, and so he gets there, and there's a guy in a bathroom with a knife or 2 knives, and the officers were trying to keep the door open, and he'd keep slamming it. Mm-hmm. And they'd open it and he'd slam it. And they'd open it and he'd slam it. He's like, I'm not fucking coming out, right? All this kind of stuff. And he shows up there and he's like, what are you guys doing? Leave the door closed, right? Put a table in front of the door in case he decides to, do something crazy and jump out. Now he has to mitigate the table. But at the end of the day, he's like, just sit here. Just put your guns away and let's just see what he does. I mean, Jim is obviously an interesting example because he's also a negotiator and all these other things. But in this situation that he explained in this actual thing that took place, he said after 5-10 minutes, he's like, hey, are you thirsty? Do you want anything? Right? Expletive. 10 minutes later, he's like, hey, are you hungry? He's like, yeah, kinda. What'd he do? He put the knives down and he came out. Mm-hmm. Right? You take that scenario nowadays, armed suspect in a room, non-compliant, 4 officers drawing down on them. How do you think that's going to turn out?
Well, what's interesting about that example is we have seen body cam footage after body cam footage after body cam footage of that exact situation in different cities. It's what I say, because I teach all over the place. And what's interesting is it does not matter where you go in the country, cops are responding to parties, and there's young people who are drinking and they all have red Dixie cups. I don't care if you're in Canada, I don't care if you're in France, I don't care if you're in London, it does not matter. You can be in Kansas. Somebody will barricade himself in a bathroom with a knife. Go figure. You know Gordon Graham, a friend of mine. Favorite phrase from Gordon: what's predictable is preventable. What's predictable is somebody's going to hold themselves up in a bathroom with some version of an edged weapon. And what's preventable is you having a bad encounter with that person. It's totally preventable. Up until the point where the person decides they want to die, suicide by cop, in which case you might not be able to prevent that from going back. Might not be able to. But you are 100% right. It's like, what are you guys doing? It takes sometimes that person who has either the insight in the moment or has thought this through in the beginning. Let me ask you this. When you think back over your career, military, law enforcement, whatever areas you want to go into, pre-planning, how much of a impact did that have when you came through, when you had pre-planned something and you're now facing a same or similar situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's invaluable if you have time. There's going to be some situations where, let's use a military example, right? I might have a patrol operation where we're going to go do a combat patrol, right? And so I'm sitting there, I'm going to write out orders. We're going to game plan, right? We're going to write our nav plan. We're going to write our primary, secondary, tertiary routes. We're going to write our, our comms nets. We're going to do all this kind of stuff, plan everything up. We go on the patrol, which is planned. And we know if X happens, we're going to do Y. If this happens, we're going to do this. If this happens, we're going to do this. And everybody's on the same page. And there might be slight variance to that, but overall, if there's a certain action, we have a designated reaction. But now on that patrol, right, we get ambushed, right? Even though we have a plan of if we are ambushed, we will do X, Y, or Z, just like in anything we see in law enforcement, we train to counter ambush. But human beings are human beings, right? You're going to have some that freeze. You're going to have some that move. You're going to have some that the variance of human behavior in a life or death situation is very wide.
Yeah.
Through training and through pre-planning, we start to achieve more favorable outcomes through the majority of those engagements. If I have no training and we've not briefed anybody, then the chances of coming out of that successfully or unscathed is probably next to zero. You start stacking that deck, like I said, and you start, okay, now we're gonna train a bit about, hey, if we get engaged, it's whether it's a direct engagement or the direct coming at us from our flank or whatever it is, we have a response to that. Here's the response. Okay, so now I've given them a little bit of an information, and so I've given them something to do, but that's still not really going to give us a lot there. They have an idea, but what is their actual response in that situation? Now, if we take that and we stack training on top of that and say, okay, we're going to actually practice this now. We're going to do some force on force. And then we're going to do it controlled, and then we're going to do it uncontrolled. And when I say controlled and uncontrolled, I mean, they're going to know what's going to happen versus we're going to run through a scenario and they're not going to know when it's going to happen.
Gotcha.
And then we do it again and again and again and again and again to every single time in training, we get the exact desired response that we want. Okay, there's a start. Now we get back into the mission planning, and we plan for it, and we do rehearsals, and we do rehearsals and dry runs. And now we go out onto that combat patrol and we're doing it for real. My chances of success, if we are ambushed, are greatly increased because of all of the work we've done prior to that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a very specific example, but the lesson applies to everything. So if we have an officer who's brand new out of the academy now in 2023, right? What era and generation did they grow up in? Right? Did they participation ribbons, coddling, helicopter parents? And I don't mean to cast this shadow over everybody, but
there are some people that are affected heavily by that.
There's a little bit of a different culture today than there was probably 30 years ago. So you have, and speaking to academy instructors, you have these new recruits that are coming in that have never been, never been in a fight, but have never been sworn at or yelled at aggressively to any real extent, right?
Yeah.
And when, like, you have officers that are put in these situations that are where we want them to de-escalate, and you have an irate person who's yelling and screaming obscenities at them, and probably trying to pick everything that they can. So if you're not the same race, there's racial. If you're not the same sex, talking about that, or they'll throw anything out there about your mom, about your dad, about your sister, brother, if that is do I really want the first time that officer experiences that to be in the field when it really matters? Or do I want to pre-expose them to that level of stress prior to, right? So when we start talking de-escalation, it's I think of it the same way that I think of you training counter ambush on patrol, is we need to run our officers through these situations in training over and over and over and over again, so that they're not, so one, their understanding of the stress response that they're going to have within themselves, right? We can't stress inoculate. Stress inoculation is, you can't inoculate to stress, but what you can do is you can expose people to stress so that our brains, when we get into it, right, it goes, oh, I've been here before. Right? We're still going to get that initial response. We always do. It's just the people that are really good at it, they cycle it a lot faster.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, I've been here before. Okay, I got this. That, when we talk about pre-planning, I see it through a training lens. That pre-planning is the training that we do. And if we're doing it, if we're not training our officers and planning and allowing them to go through these situations in training before we get to the field, what do you think's going to happen? Like, it's frustrating, and this is the conversation that every instructor here will have with anybody, is we can't get our administrators to understand that if we don't have training time, you're not going to get the outcome that you want when we're dealing with the public.
Yeah, and unfortunately, training budgets, I have seen over my 30 years in law enforcement, consistently, they're the first to go. They're the first line item that administration can take off the budget. Just, oh yeah, we'll redline that. California, as an example, still has limits from, I can't even count how many years back it was. Officers can only go to this many hours of training, except in these limited classes. Other than that, they can't go to any more hours than that in training. And they still haven't fixed it, even though the economy got much better, because they did it during a budget crisis time. Even though the economy got much better, even though there was more availability, no, they didn't change that rule about limiting training. So, and then I think the other big issue is, in you and I believe we've had separate conversations about this with other people, is training silos. Brian Willis is really big on this too, where, and if you haven't heard anything, listeners, about Brian Willis, I'll put something in the show notes about how to follow him. He's an amazing instructor, but these training silos where you're training people in one area and then you get trained in a different area, but they never interact. When, as you said, everything that we do in this job is so fluid that these things absolutely interact. So Jason Durr and I talked about that with the concept of interleaving training, where you're taking different subjects and he says interleaving, I say interweaving, but you're blending them together so that it actually enhances the learning and it helps deal with that silo issue. So listeners, if you have the opportunity, make sure you listen to that episode with Jason Durr, D-E-R, super wicked smart guy. And when he talks about training techniques. So I think I'm going to call this episode Stacking the Deck.
Sure.
I think that'd be good. It's been a common theme through the almost 40 minutes that we've had together today. Adam, I really appreciate you being here. Love your insights. Love your, God, you got passion, dude. You truly have a passion for many things. You have a passion for living. You have a passion for training. You have a passion for making sure that officers and military are safe. And you have a passion for your family. And I really, really respect that about you.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate that. You know, I obviously with ILET and all this stuff, and you being a big part of that, and you know, coming along for the ride, which is what is that we're doing. We still don't really know, but at the end of the day, it comes down to things like this. You starting a new podcast, which is going to reach more people, share more information, and hopefully create better outcomes. Right? That's what it comes down to. It just comes down to how do we get as much actionable, relevant training to as many people as possible. That's it. You know, and if it takes podcasts, if it takes free training, if it takes, you know, finding ways to put grant writers and agencies so that they get access to grant funding or whatever it is, we need to start collaborating as an industry. Right? And you know, the time has gone from all of these training companies to being like, well, we do this and you do the same thing, so we can't work together. I'm sure you've noticed this here. There's a lot of companies here that have these little partnerships now where they're starting to do things together and realizing, oh shit, we're actually reaching a lot more people, creating better content and doing more for the community. And, you know, the nice result of that is they also help grow their businesses. But it's because of the collaboration. Yeah.
Which allows them to reach more people, which was ultimately, you talk to anybody who started one of these training company businesses or anything related to that, is their goal was to serve as many people as possible. And they're never going to be able to do that. They're never going to be able to scale without some sort of collaborative partnership. Yeah, totally agree with you.
Well, no, brother, I appreciate this. And anytime you want to chat, you know where to find me. So.
Well, it's always enjoyable. I'd like to give you a gift. This is the IDEA Challenge coin. And listeners, I've shown this to you before, and it's got a kind of really cool 3D printing process on the back. So thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time and, again, all your insights.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Listeners, Adam's information will be in the show notes, information about ILET, links to the website. Definitely check out ILET. I'm a big believer. I'm a founding member of that organization, and I invested in them because I believe in what Adam's vision is and the people that support you and work with you. You got some top-notch people that you drew together. You're like a human magnet for talent. People are just drawn to you.
It's funny. It's been a journey, but at the end of the day, it comes down to transparency and trust.
Yeah.
You know, I've just said from the very beginning, it's like, if I can't sit down and have a beer with you, I probably just don't want to work with you. And then after that, do we have the same mission and values, right? Are we doing the right things for the right reasons?
Yeah.
And then does it make sense? Like, can we actually do something with this? And then after all of that, you know, is there, you know, pay, revenue, profit, whatever you want to call that. But that's a byproduct of doing the right thing for the right reason first. And that's the group of people that we have around. And, you know, ILEETA is a great example of that. I mean, there's so many people that are involved with ILET that come from ILEETA. And ILEETA has been a big partner of ours since the very beginning. And I will support ILEETA until this company doesn't exist anymore, or I don't exist anymore, because it is so phenomenal. And I think you see that here. You see that with the people that you've had on your show. And it's just, there's certain people out there that do things for the wrong reasons, or they do, no, I wouldn't say the wrong reasons, but they're not doing it because all they want to do is just share and make the world a better place. There's always a secondary or tertiary motive.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of instructors here that put others well before themselves. And I think you see that in what you do and with what you're doing. And hopefully that's the culture that we're building with ILET. And so, yeah, man, I'm so honored to have you be one of our founding members as well, and excited that we get to do more stuff like this.
Yeah, it's cool being stuff. Listeners, check out our other podcast episodes. Check out ILET. Keep an eye on Adam because he's just amazing, and you're guaranteed a great laugh and amazing insights and brilliance. Thanks for listening to this episode, and until next time, as always, stay safe. I hope you found a lot of great value in this episode of the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. Please be sure to go to our website, theidea.world, THEIDEA.world. On that website, just click on the link that resonates with you most. If you're a K-12 educator, if you're a firefighter, medical services, law enforcement, flight attendants, whatever industry you're in, we have specialized training for you. So check that training out, because literally it can save your life, it can save your relationship, it can save your career. So check out theidea.world. I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. This is Kerry Mensior, and thanks for watching this episode of the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. I hope you got some great insights that you can use right away. But don't stop here. Click that video link above and keep the momentum going with another powerful episode. And hey, if you haven't already, please hit that like button and the subscribe bell so you never miss an episode. New strategies, new stories, and new ways to connect coming your way every week. See you in the next episode.